how did the fight between Shanks and Loki go? I want to see that now! I'm sure this was your reaction to Loki's words about Shanks. Since I know perfectly well that we won't see this in One Piece, I've decided to recreate the fight myself for you to enjoy. I just want to say that I would really appreciate your subscription to help me reach 1,000 subscribers and fulfill my dream, as well as a like if you enjoy the video. Now, let me leave you with the battle of Loki versus Shanks, and I hope you enjoy it.
The sun blazed in the sky over Elbaf, the home of the giant warriors. The inhabitants had gathered around the majestic Atom Tree, its silhouette dominating the landscape with branches stretching toward the sky as if trying to touch the clouds. It was a special day, for an unexpected visitor had arrived on the island's shores. Shanks, the Red Emperor. Rumors of his presence had quickly spread across Elbaf, generating a murmur of awe and admiration. The giants of the kingdom felt honored and bewildered. Although Shanks was known and respected worldwide, his arrival in Elbaf was seen as an act of defiance. Even more, Prince Loki, the most powerful and feared giant of all, viewed it as a provocation. Loki was a colossus of immense strength, with pride and arrogance as vast as his size. His reputation as the strongest warrior of Elbaf gave him an aura of invincibility. Calm and confident, Shanks advanced toward the Atom Tree, where an area had been prepared for combat. The giants watched from afar, amazed that someone as small as Shanks would dare to face Loki. The tension in the air was palpable, and even Loki could not contain his impatience.
Shanks, what makes you think a mere human can face me?
Roared Loki, his voice rumbling like thunder in the mountains. The ground trembled beneath his feet as he approached Shanks, who remained calm.
I didn't come here to prove anything, Loki.
Shanks replied with a calm smile, his eyes displaying an unsettling serenity.
But if you insist on fighting, I won't disappoint you.
Loki's eyes filled with fury at the Red Emperor's calm demeanor. How dare this man, small and insignificant before the greatness of Elbaf, speak with such confidence? Loki clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white as marble, his muscles tensing.
I'm gonna crush you, Shanks!
Loki shouted, charging at the Emperor with all his fury. With impressive speed for his size, Loki swung his massive arm toward Shanks, trying to hit him with brutal force. Shanks, keeping his composure, took a small step back, dodging the blow just in time. Loki's fist smashed into the ground with devastating power, causing the earth to crack under the pressure. Fragments of rock and dust flew in all directions as the people of Elbaf watched with wide eyes of astonishment. Shanks wasted no time. Seizing the moment as Loki regained his balance, he unsheathed his sword, Griffin, and made a swift slash toward the giant. The blade moved like lightning, slicing through the air with a sharp whistle. Shanks's swordsmanship was legendary, and his conqueror's haki coated the blade, amplifying its power. However, Loki, with surprising speed for his size, raised his arm to block the attack. Although Shanks' sword struck with force, it barely left a scratch on the giant's thick skin, who let out a mocking laugh.
Is that all? I thought you were one of the Sea Emperors.
Loki taunted, looking at Shanks with a contemptuous smile. Shanks didn't respond, but in his gaze lay an unbreakable determination. He knew Loki was no ordinary foe. His immense strength and resilience were legendary, and underestimating him would be a fatal mistake. However, Shanks was also aware that true power in a fight wasn't solely about brute strength, but about skill and precision.
Don't underestimate true strength, Loki. Strength isn't always measured in size.
Shanks said, readying himself for the next exchange. Loki roared, feeling provoked, and launched a series of punches, each stronger and faster than the last. Each punch and sweep of his massive arms created shockwaves that shook the ground. But Shanks, with agility and skill, dodged every one, moving like a shadow. The giants, fascinated and amazed, watched as the small human dodged their prince's attacks with a skill they had never seen. Shanks' agility was like that of a dancer, moving between Loki's attacks with impressive precision. Finally, Shanks saw an opening and lunged forward, aiming his sword at Loki's right arm. With impressive speed, Griffin's blade pierced the giant's skin, leaving a wound that, though not deep, made Loki grunt in pain.
Stupid human.
Loki shouted, stepping back as he touched his wound in disbelief. Shanks looked at him without saying a word, but his expression showed he wouldn't stop until he defeated his opponent. Loki, filled with rage, decided to use all his strength. He stretched both arms and leaped into the air, rising like a moving mountain. ready to crush Shanks with his full weight. Shanks watched as Loki descended on him like a meteor, and at that moment the Emperor unleashed a burst of Conqueror's haki that spread in all directions. The pressure of his haki was so intense that even the giants around them felt a shiver in their souls. Just moments before Loki hit the ground, Shanks moved with incredible speed, dodging the blow and appearing at his enemy's side. The ground cracked under Loki's impact and a large cloud of dust rose into the air, covering both combatants. As the dust began to clear, Shanks stood unharmed while Loki slowly got up, his face showing a mix of fury and disbelief.
You're stronger than I thought, Shanks.
Admitted Loki, wiping sweat from his forehead.
But you can't win. I am the Prince of Elbaf, and in this land, I am invincible.
Strength and pride have made you arrogant, Loki. But even the strongest warrior must recognize their limits.
Shanks replied, his tone as firm as his gaze. Both prepared for the next exchange, determined not to back down. The battle between the Emperor and the Prince of Elbaf had only just begun, and neither was willing to yield. Loki's roar echoed across the island, a cry of fury and defiance that shook the mountains of Elbaf. The wound Shanks had managed to open on his arm wasn't deep, but it was a direct affront to his pride. Loki gritted his teeth, his eyes blazing with a wild rage, and decided to unleash the full brutality that characterized the warriors of Elbaf.
Enough games, Shanks.
Loki shouted, lifting his wounded arm and flexing it until his muscles looked like cords of steel.
I'll show you what it means to face a true giant.
The giants watching around the Atom Tree held their breath. They knew what was coming. It was one of the most feared techniques of the Elbaf warriors, a feat of sheer brute force that even other giants wouldn't dare to challenge. The Jormungandr smash. Loki raised both arms and took a deep breath, his chest swelling as if he were about to unleash a hurricane, then brought his fist crashing down with a force capable of pulverizing mountains. Shanks observed the movement closely. It wasn't an elegant or refined technique, but the immense power behind it could be lethal. As Loki's fists rushed toward him, Shanks took a step back and released a powerful wave of observation haki, allowing him to foresee the impact. He calculated the timing, and at the last second he leaped to the side, dodging Loki's fists by mere inches. The ground shattered under Loki's attack, creating a massive crater. The sound was deafening, like lightning striking the earth, and the shockwaves sent fragments of rock flying in all directions. The giants took a few steps back, fearful, and dust covered the battlefield. Yet Shanks had vanished from sight, moving at a speed that even Loki couldn't track.
Where are you, Shanks?
Loki roared, trying to locate him in the dust cloud.
Here, Loki.
Shanks replied from behind him, and with a swift, precise movement delivered another slash straight to the giant's leg. The sword Griffin, wrapped in armament haki, sliced through Loki's tough skin, opening a deep wound on his calf. Loki let out a cry of pain, staggering as he tried to keep his balance. His knee buckled, and he fell onto one leg, his pride and resilience starting to show cracks.
You insolent wretch.
Loki shouted, trying to turn to strike Shanks, but his injury made it difficult to move with the same speed as before.
I told you, Loki. Size and strength don't always decide a fight.
Shanks said, his voice calm but firm, his gaze fixed on the giant. Furious and wounded, Loki began to gather all his remaining strength. His eyes reflected a growing hatred for Shanks, mixed with a stubbornness that pushed him not to give in. For Loki, admitting the superiority of someone so small was humiliating, but the giant wasn't done yet. He took a deep breath, concentrating all his energy into one final move. With a roar that shook all of Elbaf, Loki struck the ground with immense force, sending shockwaves through the terrain. Shanks was forced to retreat, dodging fragments of rock flying in all directions. Loki seized the moment, lifting a massive rock with surprising agility for someone his size, and hurled it at Shanks with the force of a cannonball. Shanks, displaying his skill and agility, leapt backward and avoided the boulder, which crashed to the ground, sending a cloud of debris into the air. The Emperor of the Sea watched Loki, noticing how rage and wounded pride were consuming the giant. Loki was breathing heavily, but his resolve hadn't wavered.
You think you can defeat me with tricks?
Loki shouted, his voice echoing with frustration.
You're nothing but an insignificant man, compared to the true warriors of Elbaf.
Loki, I don't wish to destroy you.
Shanks replied.
This fight can end right now if you're able to recognize that even you have a limit.
Never!
Loki exclaimed, his pride blinding him completely. Shanks sighed. He knew that while Loki was a formidable warrior, his arrogance and stubbornness were his true weaknesses. The battle continued, and it was clear the giant was wearing down. The wound on his leg hampered his movements, and his energy was beginning to drain while Shanks maintained an unshakable calm, as if he weren't exerting himself fully. Loki lunged at Shanks again, using his uninjured arm to try to trap him in a deadly grip. This time the giant had focused all his power into a single move, determined to crush the Emperor of the Sea once and for all. His arm came down like a hammer, and Shanks, knowing he couldn't fully dodge, decided to confront it another way.
Conqueror's Haki.
Shanks shouted, releasing a powerful wave of energy that momentarily halted Loki's attack. Shanks's Conqueror's Haki enveloped the area like an aura, and several giants stepped back, feeling an overwhelming pressure on their shoulders. Shanks's power was so immense that even Loki, who had never before encountered Conqueror's Haki at this level, felt a flicker of fear in his heart. Seizing that moment of hesitation, Shanks charged at Loki, moving like lightning. With flawless skill, he leapt toward the giant's face, aiming his sword precisely at his left eye. Loki barely had time to react before Griffin passed close to his face, slicing a scar above his left eyebrow. Though not a deep wound, it was enough to make Loki stagger and retreat. Shanks landed gracefully a few meters away from Loki, who placed a hand on his face, feeling the blood trickling down his skin. The pain, combined with the humiliation of being wounded in this way, caused his fury to erupt once more.
Curse you, Shanks.
Loki shouted, his words full of frustration.
I will not kneel before you. I am the Prince of Elbaf.
Then prove it.
Shanks replied, his calm unbroken.
Show that you have the strength not only to fight but also to learn from this battle.
But Loki, blinded by pride, couldn't understand Shanks's words. He only saw in him an enemy who had wounded his honor, and the giant was willing to exhaust his last breath to win. The battle raged on, each of the combatants driven by a sense of duty and pride, though in opposite directions. In the distance, the giants of Elbaf watched in silence. Many of them began to wonder if Loki could truly win, while others simply admired Shanks's skill. No one had imagined a human could challenge the Prince of Elbaf in this way. However, the fight was far from over, and both Shanks and Loki knew that the next exchange would be decisive. Loki was breathing heavily. His giant body was covered in wounds, and his pride, more than his flesh, was crumbling with each of Shanks's movements. The Prince of Elbaf had started the battle with arrogant confidence, convinced that no human could oppose his overwhelming strength. However, before him stood Shanks, a man whose determination and skills seemed to surpass any limit. As Loki gathered his last strength, Shanks watched him silently. The sword Griffin still glowed with an aura of armament Haki, but his movements were precise and controlled. There was no anger on his face, only an unshakable resolve.
Loki, this battle doesn't have to end this way. You can still stop,
said Shanks, his tone devoid of mockery, only a genuine calm.
You're a warrior of Elbaf. You can decide how this ends.
Shanks's words, however, only seemed to fuel Loki's fury.
Shut up, Shanks. Don't tell me how to act,
growled the giant, his voice reverberating through the air. The wound on his brow bled and his eyes reflected a mixture of fury and pain.
I am the prince of this land, and I won't allow a mere man to lecture me.
Are you so stubborn, Loki?
Shanks replied, his voice deep and steady, though his words cut like the edge of his sword.
Or are you afraid to acknowledge that there's more than brute strength?
Loki's face tensed. He knew Shanks wasn't lying, but his pride blinded him. With a cry of sheer desperation, Loki charged at Shanks, his fist raised in a final attempt to crush him with all his might. The Emperor of the Sea didn't move, instead preparing to receive the blow, wrapping his arm with Conqueror's Haki. The pressure emanating from Shanks made the air around him vibrate. Loki felt the intensity of the Haki like an invisible barrier, but his pride wouldn't let him stop. The collision between Loki's fist and Shanks's defense produced a shockwave that shook the foundations of the Atom Tree. The giants watching stepped back, feeling the impact in their own bodies. To everyone's surprise, Shanks remained firm. Although Loki was a giant with colossal physical strength, Shanks possessed a will so indomitable that it seemed capable of matching his enemy's power. At the moment of impact, Shanks stepped forward, holding Loki's fist, and taking advantage of his moment of vulnerability. In a swift movement, he turned and executed a hold, using the giant's own strength against him. Loki fell to the ground with a crash, while Shanks stood beside him. Loki panted, his body exhausted and covered in wounds. His face showed a mixture of pain and confusion. He couldn't understand how someone so small could have overpowered him. But more than that, he couldn't accept that he had been defeated without Shanks showing any hatred or contempt. On the contrary, the Emperor of the Sea looked at him with a serious expression, but without arrogance.
It's not just about strength, Loki.
Shanks said, his voice soft but firm.
It's about knowing when to fight and when to accept that there are paths other than battle.
Loki, still lying on the ground, felt a wave of shame and frustration. But deep down, something in Shanks's words touched an unknown part of him. The giants around were silent, watching their fallen prince with a mix of respect and awe. The news of Loki's defeat by a common man would not leave Elbaf as promised, but the impact of that battle would leave a mark on all present.
You're strong, Shanks.
Admitted Loki, his voice low and filled with forced humility.
More than I would have imagined.
Shanks nodded, extending a hand to Loki to help him up. The gesture was unexpected, but after a moment of hesitation, Loki accepted the help, standing with difficulty.
Sometimes acknowledging our limitations makes us stronger, not weaker.
Shanks said, looking him in the eye. Loki didn't reply, but inside he knew Shanks was right. Though his pride was wounded, he had learned a lesson he would never forget. That battle wasn't just about measuring strength, but about learning to see beyond his own power. As he stood up, the giants began to approach silently, their gazes filled with respect for both fighters. Shanks sheathed his sword, turning to leave as the atmosphere around the Atom Tree began to calm. Before walking away, he cast one last glance at Loki.
Next time we meet, I hope it's as allies, not as enemies, Prince of Elbaf.
Loki nodded, without a word. Deep down, he knew there was much to learn and that though the battle was over, the path to becoming a true warrior of Elbaf had just begun. Shanks's figure faded into the horizon, leaving Loki and his people reflecting on the true nature of strength and wisdom. The legend of that battle would be etched in the minds of the giants of Elbaf, not as a mere clash of power, but as the day the proud Prince Loki learned a valuable lesson in honor and humility.